Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, we don't normally do this, but this is a week when we're doing a lot of stuff we don't normally do because it is Ohio State-Oregon week. It is a week that we have had circled on our calendars for, I don't know, since the Oregon to the Big Ten news broke, basically, and they released the schedules, and we went, oh boy, we get to go to Oregon, and it's probably going to be a pretty good football game. Tony, I think we have called that correctly. I think it's probably going to be a pretty good football game.
Must credit Tom Orr that this is going to be a big game. Yeah, and so being a big game, we wanted to do similar to what we do with Michigan Monday, was recap what Oregon just did the previous week, which was against Michigan State. Also similar to what we've done with playoff games, with the Georgia game a couple of years ago, watching like 5 Georgia games and recapping what we saw there. We can't do that here. We don't have enough days, don't have enough hours, but we can talk about one game and then maybe mix in some other stuff here and there throughout about this. But I think most everybody watched Oregon beat Michigan State 31-10 on Friday night. I must admit, I tuned away at the fourth quarter to then go watch the other game that was going on. That was a more entertaining game. But by the fourth quarter, both benches were in this game, and it was well over. But I would be interested to hear other people's thoughts in terms of, I did see it on Twitter and on our Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus, where you see Dillon Gabriel throw 2 interceptions in the red zone, 1 in the end zone, 1 at like the 5-yard line or whatever. And you start to see like, oh, that's going to happen for Ohio State. My thought when I'm watching this is he did not have much respect for Michigan State. And he showed it with some of the throws that he was making and didn't make. And I think maybe he underestimated them. I don't see that same kind of underestimation coming this week. I expect him to take Ohio State very seriously. I know that he will. I wonder if that means he's going to be more cautious in some of those throws. I think it means he needs to be earlier and more on time with some of those, with all of those throws. But I'm interested to see if he takes the same kind of chances that he did in this game, because I don't know that he will.
It's so interesting because it's one of those situations where you're going to need to put up points because Ohio State's going to put up more than 0 points in non-garbage time situations, which is what Michigan State did. Michigan State was shut out until the fourth quarter. It was very similar. If you only watch the Ohio State-Iowa game or the Oregon-Michigan State game, you basically saw the other one too. It was very similar games in a lot of ways. But it's so interesting because you could see Dillon Gabriel and really the Oregon coaching staff feeling like, okay, we've got to take some chances here because we can't just, if we can't just run the ball like we did against Michigan State, especially in the first half, you're going to have to take some chances in the passing game. But you could also see them saying, well, we can't make the big mistake. And the windows are going to be a lot tighter in the passing game against Ohio State than they were against Michigan State. So it's one of those situations where you would love to be able to ask a coach in the middle of the week, how do you look at that? Is that you have to be more aggressive because the other opponent is so good, or do you have to be more conservative because the opponent's so good? And you won't actually get an answer. And it feels like you might get coaches who are one team approaches it one way and one team approaches it the other, because I think there is a legitimate argument for both of those positions. And you sort of get those games where there's a little bit of a feeling out process at the start, and they're just kind of, 2 boxers kind of standing at arm's length and kind of jabbing at each other for a while. Sometimes you get those kind of games. And then once people figure out where things really stand, then you see someone get a little more aggressive.
I don't know that you can try to dial Dillon Gabriel back, but he's a baller. He's going to take his chances. I just think some of these throws, the second interception into the end zone, was that the first interception? The first interception back across his body, kind of into the end zone, and gets intercepted. And you can't attempt those throws against Ohio State or a better defense. But also, that's the kind of player he is, and he is very accurate. So he's going to trust himself. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He's never had the biggest arm. He's always known that. He's been able to operate without it. But it's going to be fascinating to see. I think Tom, because this loss for whoever happens to, it doesn't derail them. It doesn't kick them out of the playoffs. I think you're going to see some haymakers all game long. I just don't think you should see it from the 5 in. Like be more careful inside the 10-yard line. Outside of that range, I think you're going to see if the defenses allow for, like, meaning if they're just playing shell coverage or too deep, and you can't throw deep, I think you're going to see some shots in this one. Just two dudes standing in the ring, just wailing on each other to see who eventually breaks. And I don't know that I have a great feel for which of these two defenses or two offenses will break first.
That's a really interesting point, because this game is probably a bigger positive deal for the team that wins than it is a negative deal for the team that loses. Unless it's a 30-point game. If someone loses 48-10 or something, sure, then it's a big problem for the team that loses. If this game is 35-31, 42-35, 28-24, whatever, if it's a one-possession game, this is a game where it's what's going to happen in this game is what people get so annoyed when it happens in the SEC, where, boy, that's such a huge win for the team that won that it basically counts as 2 wins, and it's such a good quality loss for the team that loses that it's basically a win in and of itself. So you're giving out like 2.5 wins, 3 wins for one game. But I think that's kind of how it could go, because with the team that wins is going to have a top 5 win, potentially a road top 5 win. And the team that loses, if these teams only have maybe 1 or 2 more real losable games on their schedule, and you're probably getting hit at 10-2. So this is not a season ender for the team that loses.
No, and I think that's why you can just go at it. And we've seen an aggressive attitude from Ryan Day, and I know we're supposed to be talking about Oregon. We've seen a more aggressive attitude from Ryan Day this season, which reminds me of his approach in the Georgia game. And I think you'll see that in this one. I'm fascinated to see how that first quarter goes, because the crowd is going to be insane. And I'm interested to see how the Ohio State offense handles that. But we'll get there. Let's talk about Ohio. Let's talk about Oregon and Michigan State. And this was, I would say, Dillon Gabriel's worst game against probably the best defense he's faced. First time he was under 75% completion percentage. He was 20 of 32. 257 yards, 2 touchdown passes. As I said, 2 interceptions. Did rush for 22 yards and a touchdown on a keeper. That's always going to be part of something you have to worry about with him. Doesn't mean he's always going to run it, but it's always there, which then opens things up more for Jordan James and the rest of the Oregon running game. What was interesting to me is, as I'm watching this, and Jordan James, the running back, kind of goes off in this one and has a very good game, 166 yards on 24 carries. The announcers were making it sound like this has been a down year for James. I'm like, has it? And then you go and look at his numbers, and he's rushed for over 100 yards in almost all of his games. He's been totally fine, and I was just like confused by that. But he was really good in this one. They pushed the Michigan State defensive line around for a bit. And he's going to be one that Ohio State has to tackle. And I know they tackled very well against Iowa, but that is in a confined space. The spaces will be much less confined this coming week. And those linebackers that have struggled with their tackling, and they were pretty good on Saturday, they're going to need to be much better, because it's a much different game against Oregon's offense than it is Iowa's offense. So tackling in space is going to be huge. Jordan James does not like to get tackled in space.
Yeah, he's a dynamic player. He 16 carries, 151 yards, and a touchdown before halftime in that game. And then he got kind of drilled on the knee right before halftime. And then his second half stats were not, he didn't have nearly as many carries, didn't have many yards in the second half. I wonder how healthy that knee is and if that might have impacted things. But they use him even when you don't think of it as an in-space situation. Like, for example, they're right in the goal line, and they just ran this little, just kind of like shovel option pitch to him, where it was like they showed it action one way and just pitched it to him to the weak side, and he had just sort of a walk-in touchdown. So you can find space for him even when there's not a ton of space. Getting him to the ground is going to be an enormous part of this game for Ohio State, because Michigan State was not even close. I tweeted out a picture of a statue with no arms, and that was Michigan State on Friday night, and that was a picture of Michigan State trying to tackle Jordan James. It was just, he was bouncing off people. There were times when he wasn't touched until he was 8-9 yards downfield. It was a mess for Michigan State. And if they can run the ball like that, that opens up so many other things. I don't think that Oregon's passing offense is necessarily as good as Ohio State's. I don't know that their wide receiver talent is quite as good as Ohio State's. But if they can run the ball, that's going to open things up in the passing game. We'll get to Oregon's tight end in a minute. You notice I didn't say that I thought that Ohio State had better tight ends than Oregon. I do not think that, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, if Ohio State can limit, you get to Jordan James 3 yards downfield and you get him down at 3 yards, that's going to be one kind of football game. If you get to him 3 yards downfield or 5 yards downfield, and then he gets 6 or 8 on that is a very different kind of night for the Ohio State defense.
Yeah, another guy that they're going to have to tackle is Tez Johnson, slot receiver, who is very difficult to tackle in one-on-one situations. And he's 10 catches, 84 yards. That's kind of what he's done this season. He's 8, 9, 10 catches a game, 9, 10, 11 yards per catch. So it's not a big number, but he's a volume guy. And I kind of have been surprised that the Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart, the other two big-time receivers, have not been as productive. Like Tez Johnson has the majority of the catches for Oregon this season, and he's putting up decent numbers. But like I said, the long of 17 yards this past week, but he's got 43 catches on the season. Trayshawn Holden has 19. Evan Stewart has 16. We'll talk about tight end Terrence Ferguson with 16 as well. I was expecting a more balanced attack this season, and we haven't seen that. Now, Trayshawn Holden did have a fantastic catch in this game where he fell to the ground and still was able to catch the ball downfield. I think a 37-yard gain. Evan Stewart had a touchdown. Both of those guys have transferred in over the past couple of years. But I'm with you. Like they need to be able to tackle Tez Johnson. We're going to see a bunch of Jordan Hancock this coming week after not seeing him much for the past 2 weeks at nickel. It's going to be very big for him. But overall, I don't know how much they're going to stretch Ohio State vertically. They're going to try. I think it's the wide stuff that you have to be just as concerned with.
Yeah, that you can stretch the field vertically. You can stretch the field horizontally. Iowa very cleverly does neither of those things. Oregon's going to try and do both. They're definitely going to do it horizontally. It's just a question of whether they can hit those deep shots. But yeah, Tez Johnson is, I think, the Tez Johnson-Jordan Hancock matchup is going to be a really interesting one, because I think they move him around a little bit, Johnson, but he works out of the slot a lot. And that's typically where you're going to see Jordan Hancock covering that slot guy in the nickel role. Jordan Hancock has really not played a whole heck of a lot the last couple of weeks because Ohio State's been in that 3 linebacker lineup. You're going to see Jordan Hancock's going to go from somewhat of a bystander the last couple of weeks to a very big part of this game, because Tez Johnson is not a game breaker. He's not the guy who's going to have a bunch of 70-yard touchdowns. He's the guy who's going to have a bunch of 7-yard gains on 3rd and 5 that then keep the drive moving, keep the chains moving, keep the Oregon offense on the field. If Ohio State can limit him, if Ohio State can take him away, you watch the game, and it doesn't take very long to figure out that he is Dillon Gabriel's security blanket. He is the guy who Dillon Gabriel, it's 3rd and 5. He's looking for Tez Johnson very early in his progression on a lot of those routes. And Tez Johnson is a very reliable receiver. He's converted a lot of his targets into catches this year. So that's going to be a very, very interesting matchup there. The outside receivers are okay for Oregon, but they're not as big of a part of the game plan as Tez Johnson is. That doesn't mean they're not a part of the game plan. There was right before the half, there was a really nice corner route throw from Gabriel to Evan Stewart for a touchdown. It's these are guys who are, you can't forget about them, but I think that those guys, Evan Stewart against Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun. I mean, the outside receivers, I think Ohio State might be able to contain those guys a little bit more. It's really what are they going to do about Tez Johnson that is kind of the biggest question to me.
I wonder if 10 catches, if he does exactly what he did if he does next week exactly what he did this week, 10 catches, 84 yards, one score, a 17-yard long. I think Ohio State would take the 17-yard long right now. Boom, seal it up. 8.4 yards per catch, they would take that. But of these 10 catches, I should go back and look how many of them converted third downs. They were 6 of 12 on third downs. How many times did they, how many of those catches do they increase the efficiency, basically? How successful are they? Did they get the necessary yardage to make the next down easier? Probably. But I still think if you hold Johnson to 8.4 yards per catch, Ohio State would take that right now. The thing is, don't give up 10 catches to him. That's the moving of the chains part. But if you can hold him to 8.4 yards per catch, do that. Tight end Terrence Ferguson, however, 82 yards on 2 catches, a screen pass of 62 yards. If you can't hold Ferguson under 41 yards per catch next week, you might have some issues. And I would expect Dillon Gabriel to use him more than just twice next week. I think that's going to be a focal point of their offense. I know the box score I'm looking at doesn't have targets for Ferguson. I don't know if you've got one there, but it feels like they should have gone after him. Like they did go at him more than just those 2. But I think he's going to be a big piece of the offense for Oregon this coming week.
Yeah, five targets for Ferguson, 2 catches, 82 yards. The one was just it was one of those, it was one of the long Michigan passing plays where they throw it and it's 3 yards downfield and he runs for 62 yards. But it was like a tight end screen, and he is a big dude. He's a big physical guy who looks like he's going to create some mismatches for Ohio State. And he's a big guy, but he can move too. So that was a 62-yard gain. The other catch that he had was in third quarter. It was not a good throw by Gabriel. It was behind him, and he made a really nice catch there as well. This is another guy where he's probably, I'm saying this about a guy who just had a 62-yard gain. He's not going to be a big play guy. More, if he is, that's a problem for Ohio State. He's not going to be a big play guy on the whole, but he's going to have 1 or 2 catches that are really crucial first down conversions, probably for Oregon. That's where you see him potentially being a factor. And in the red zone as well, he's big enough, he's strong enough, he's tall enough and big enough to create potentially some mismatches in the red zone where you find him and it's just a 6-yard touchdown, but it's a 6-yard touchdown. That's where I could see him maybe being a factor there in the game. And there was a play where right before the touchdown to Evan Stewart, the touchdown pass to Evan Stewart, there was a play where there were, maybe 15, 18 seconds left on the clock, and Dillon Gabriel threw it to Ferguson, and Ferguson was 3 yards from the end zone, and they only had 1 timeout left, and it was like, oh boy, it was not a completed pass, but it was one of those things where it was fortunate that it was not a completed pass. That was one. This is back on Gabriel and not really Ferguson. But just I saw his name in my notes there. It was one of those things where this is a 6th-year quarterback in Dillon Gabriel. That's a mistake you'd expect a 2nd-year quarterback to make, where if you're going to complete a pass 3 yards from the end zone and you only have 1 timeout left and there's 15 seconds on the clock, you're probably taking yourself from, we have 2 more plays and then can kick a field goal, to we have 1 more play and can kick a field goal. And it worked out fine. This is a little bit of a process versus results conversation, but it's just, that kind of goes back a little bit to the decision-making in the red zone that, you got to sort of understand the clock, understand the game state, and understand that might, if you complete it, it might actually cost you.
You can definitely speed him up and get him into some bad decisions. Doesn't always cost Oregon because they're pretty good in dealing with those sorts of things. But again, they lost 2 touchdown drives from interceptions, and this one could have been a blowout instead of the blowout that it actually was. So it could have been much worse, and instead of just being plenty bad as it was. Did you have anything else on the offense before we move over to the Oregon defense?
I think we could briefly touch on the fact that the Oregon offensive line really controlled the line of scrimmage. You will see right tackle Ajani Cornelius, which if you closely follow Ohio State football, you'll kind of hear that name and go, why does that sound familiar? He was the Rhode Island transfer. who Ohio State was pursuing in the portal in the 2023 offseason. Didn't end up getting him. He's now at Oregon, but he's part of an offensive line that has really taken big strides over the course of the year. They changed their center. It was like halftime of the Boise State game. And at that point, it went from, boy, this offensive line is a problem, brackets derogatory, to, hey, this offensive line is a problem, brackets complimentary. That was they really controlled the line of scrimmage against Michigan State, were able to run the ball, really pass protected pretty well. That is one of those mid-season changes where it's not a quarterback change, so it's not something that everyone in the nation is talking about, but that is going to be, that swap and the resulting play from the Oregon offensive line, that's going to be a big storyline this week.
Yeah, the first two games against non-Power 4 teams averaged 108 yards rushing. The 3 games since against Power 4 teams averaging a little over 200 yards rushing in each of those games. So things are picking up. And you saw a 5.8 yards per carry against Michigan State. The Oregon defense is interesting to me because as I'm watching this and I'm looking at their different fronts, they'll play like the 4-2-5. They'll play, I think, a 4-3. Then you see at some point there's a 3-4. Then there's like this 5-man front, but one of the guys up there is, I think, Jeffrey Bassett, the linebacker. So it's almost kind of Jim Knowles' Jack Luck. They're kind of mugged up there. So they'll play a multitude of fronts and, come from different angles. And we saw the Aiden Childs experience, Michigan State quarterback. We saw it the week before. You saw it again in this one where he can handle some of that, but he can only handle so much success. You see him complete a pass downfield. It should have been a touchdown, but he gets down inside the 5 and then he fumbles. But I think the Oregon State or the Oregon defensive line, Jordan Birch, defensive end, a big dude. So Mateo Uiagalelei, who Ohio State recruiting people might also recognize, but they're getting after the Michigan State offense pretty well. And I just liked all of the different looks that they gave, and it's going to be a tough one for Will Howard and the Ohio State offensive line. The Ohio State offensive line has played very well this season. They're going to get a bunch of different looks from Dan Lanning and the Oregon defense in this one.
Yeah, the pass rush out of Oregon is going to be by far the most challenging thing that Ohio State has faced in terms of an offensive line this season, where you've got Mateo Uiagalelei, you've got Jordan Birch on the other side. Birch had 2.5 sacks in this game. Uiagalelei had 1, and Birch was mostly on the left side as far as, I didn't chart the whole game, but I feel like that might be a lot of Jordan Birch versus Josh Simmons and Mateo Uiagalelei against Josh Fryer. Those are going to be matchups that are going to be very important. Josh Simmons has had a great year. This is going to be a real test for him because you've seen people talking about him as potentially maybe a borderline first-round pick. This is tape that you are going to see on NFL draft day one way or the other for one of these guys, or maybe both, depending on how it goes, because that's going to be, if Ohio State can protect Will Howard, the Ohio State receivers can get open, I think. If Ohio State can run the ball, that's going to help a lot against this Oregon defense. If Ohio State is one-dimensional, if they can't get a good push in the run game and they can't run the ball, and you get one-dimensional, Michigan State couldn't run the ball at all. And that let Oregon, now you got me doing it. Now Oregon, that got the Oregon pass rush really to just be able to focus on terrorizing Aiden Childs, and they very effectively terrorized Aiden Childs most of the night. I had a note at one point, just Aiden Childs is straight up not having a good time. That was kind of the vibe on Friday night. If the Buckeyes can protect Will Howard, and if the Buckeyes can run the ball, that goes a long way towards telling me how this night is going to go and what their point total is going to be. If they can't, they are really going to have to pull a rabbit out of a hat, I think.
Yeah, I think if you give Will Howard time, and I'm expecting, when I said earlier they're going to start throwing some haymakers, I think you'll see Will Howard throw deep. I think this is the week that he perhaps starts connecting on the deep stuff, because I think they're really going to hammer it in practice and really try to get that accuracy down. That's like the one thing that he's been missing so far. And other than eliminating the 1 or 2 bad throws, weird decisions, but you can say the same thing for Dillon Gabriel as well. I am interested to watch in terms of the pass defense. cornerback Jabbar Muhammad, who is very good, but he's about 5'10". And when he is matched up with Jeremiah Smith, who is taller than 5'10", by about a half a foot, and then also the reach and the leaping, I think it's going to be a very good matchup. Interesting to watch to see how often those two come together. I think you need to get Carnell Tate back for a number of reasons for Ohio State. But overall, the Michigan State offense right now just not very well equipped to be consistently productive. They have potential in spots, and we saw that in both games. They can do it for a little while, but they can't maintain anything, and they lack discipline offensively and defensively, and Oregon took advantage of both of those things. But overall, I think there are things that Ohio State can do against this Oregon defense. I think the running game is going to be huge. That goes without saying. But I watch this, and I think that I can see Quinshon Judkins, I can see Travion Henderson having some success, and then also Will Howard pulling it and running it a little bit. Aiden Childs did it. We saw Will Howard do it this past week. I think Ohio State can run the ball, and if they are, then that opens up the passing game, as we know. I like Oregon's front. I'll just be surprised if they can hold down the Ohio State offense. And looking through the Dan Lanning, looking through the game notes of Dan Lanning's record versus says that when Oregon's defense has allowed a 100-yard receiver under Dan Lanning, they are 2-4. And when they have allowed 400 yards of total offense, they are 5-4. Do you see Ohio State doing either of those things offensively in this game?
I think I could see Ohio State doing both. I think a lot of it with the receiver is going to depend on the offensive line. That it really, to me, this whole game is how does the Ohio State offensive line hold up against the Oregon defensive line? That really is, and you're going to, it's not just the Oregon defensive line. They're going to be running some exotic stuff, and you're going to see linebackers blitzing and all that kind of stuff. But really, if you're just going to boil down the thing to, the matchups, just the units that grow on the field, are they, where are they 9 units strong? Which is the first one? The Ohio State offensive line against the Oregon defensive line is going to be a monster. And then second is probably the Ohio State defensive line against the Oregon offensive line. Like this is one of these games where all the excitement, all the stuff is going to be, oh, how is Jeremiah Smith going to do? And oh boy, how are the running backs going to do? And these two veteran quarterbacks, and it's like, it all starts with the offensive line. It always starts with the offensive line in these games. But if the Ohio State offensive line can protect, and I think they're going to be able to run the ball enough to keep Oregon honest. And I think they're going to be able to protect well enough. Will Howard's going to get sacked a few times. That is going to happen. Make your peace with that now. But I think they're also going to be able to protect enough, and that Jeremiah Smith is dynamic enough in space where you don't need to do double moves. You don't need to. I mean, Ohio State, the long one to Jeremiah Smith on Saturday against Iowa was a double move, and Ryan Day talked about the fact they needed to protect for 3.5 seconds, whatever it is. I think you're going to see a lot of get the ball to Jeremiah Smith on those like tunnel screens or slip screens. Just get it to him in space and run the Jeremiah Smith do something cool play. And that has worked extremely well for Ohio State a bunch this season. Get the ball out. Try and neutralize that defensive line by getting it out quickly. Do the stuff that teams do to Ohio State. That's how I think you will see a 100-yard game out of someone. Is it Emeka Egbuka? Is it Carnell Tate? Is it Jeremiah Smith? We'll see. If it's more than one, Ohio State's probably in either really good or really bad shape, depending on that could be. If you're wondering how could that be bad news, it's like, well, if they can't run the ball at all and they have to throw the ball 50 times, that probably is not a good night, even if it is a good statistical night. So, but yeah, I think I see them being able to throw for 100 yards. And this is one where Dan Lanning's been coaching there for quite a while now. And this is his third year, I believe, at Oregon. And that's only happened, 2-4. That's only happened 6 times. This is a game where Ohio State presents a challenge and a matchup that Oregon's defense, it doesn't face very often. And this is an Oregon team that's going to present a challenge and a matchup for the Ohio State defense that they don't face very often. So, yeah, I think Ohio State's going to be able to throw the ball enough to get someone there. And I could very easily see them getting to 400 yards of total offense as well.
Here's a couple of other numbers. Oregon is 7-5 against ranked opponents under Dan Lanning. They are 7-5 when allowing 24 or more points under Dan Lanning. They're 4-5 when trailing after the first quarter, which is interesting. So get up early and then coast. That's pretty much all you'll need to do. The last thing that I have, Tom, I don't know if you saw this tweet from John Wilner yesterday. At Wilner Hotline covers all of the formerly the Pac-12, but Big Ten teams in conference play traveling 2+ time zones this season, 1-7, with Indiana being the lone win at UCLA. So, so far that looks like a real thing. Other than road games are typically more difficult than home games, so you wouldn't expect to have a winning record necessarily, but it is interesting so far.
It is interesting. It's one of those samples that's probably too small to be super meaningful because you've got, hey, UCLA went to Penn State. I don't think the time change was what screwed UCLA in that game. And you've had, I think Rutgers went out west, I think at one point, or you've had games where, yeah, the time change is going to get you. I think it gets the West Coast teams going east more than the other way around. The fact is, they should have stat on the broadcast. Oregon in Autzen Stadium has the highest home winning percentage in the last, I think it was 2021 or something like that, in the nation. Highest home winning percentage. And that is not all. There are a lot of West Coast schools that did not have to change time zones that have gone into Eugene and lost. And it's because it is a very talented team. It is a very loud stadium. It is an intimidating environment. So I think that's more of a concern to me. If Ohio State was going out west to play UCLA, I think I would have no concern about Ohio State falling victim to the multiple time zones stat. That's much more Michigan might not be that good this year, and that's why they lost. And USC might not be that good this year, and that's why they lost twice, going a couple time zones. So that's probably a lot of it. One last thing, Oregon. This is one of these things where Oregon does a bunch of really annoying stuff on special teams. You'll see the swinging gate on PATs every once in a while. You'll see they had one where it looked like they were going to maybe do a fake onside kick at one point, and like they lined up and started going and then stopped and then just did a regular kick. It's a little. Oregon has, going back 15, 20 years, had this reputation as this sort of gimmicky Mickey Mouse program, and they're not anymore. They are winning in the line of scrimmages, so that's not what they are anymore. But they do some of the gimmicky stuff on special teams that is generally extremely annoying, and the swinging gate is one of those things where it's like you'll show that 300 times, and then it'll work once, and then everyone has to pay attention to it. It's almost more like, well, now you have to practice for this just in case during the course of the week.
Yeah, well, Ohio State has been in the same conference as Rutgers for a while now, so they are used to practicing for stupid special teams things. So I'm sure they'll be well versed in all of the shenanigans that could be afoot. So that will do it. There you go, your Oregon Sunday. Welcome everybody. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up if you're watching this on YouTube before you go. And of course, if you are listening via your podcast platform of choice, please give us a 5-star rating and review. We would appreciate that. And just hit the bell to be notified, whatever bells you've got, because we've got a ton of stuff coming for you. This is Oregon Week. We will be boots on the ground in the Eugene area later this week, and we are all very, very much looking forward to it. So stay tuned with us and continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com for coverage of all of this. So thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.